Welcome to church. My name's Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here. If you brought your Bibles, go ahead and pull those out, or we have some slipped underneath the seats in front of you, and open up to Joshua chapter 6. We are working through a sermon series in the book of Joshua that we begun at the beginning of the year, and part of me just feels like, man, there's so many great things just happening in our midst right now. Like, do we really even, let's just shut the Bible, celebrate all that God's doing in our midst, and go home, you know? And then I said, man, but all those things are happening precisely because one of the big things that we do is open this up each and every week, open up these scriptures, and treat them differently. Treat them as if life is housed within them, that God extends life to his people through their proclamation. Proclamation leads to transformation, as we see. That's good, Dave. And so we're just going to keep on doing that. We'll always keep on doing that. So we're just going to keep on plowing ahead here in Joshua chapter 6. If you're here for the first time, welcome. That's kind of our MO, is to open up the scriptures and see what God revealed to his prophets, his apostles of old, when it comes to what it means, well, who he is, what it means to follow him, and how that works. So that's what we're going to do. And in Joshua chapter 6, we're finally at Jericho in the book of Joshua, and we actually unpacked that a little bit last week. Pastor Dave was up here and unpacked what the account of Jericho really shows us about following God and who God is and what that means. And this week we're going to look at it again, except from a slightly different angle. We're going to look at it from the point of view as one experiencing the event from the inside of Jericho. So as someone who's on the inside of the city. Now, why would we spend a week doing this? Well, last week we talked about kind of the strange strategic process that God has the Israelites go through. They go to Jericho, they encircle it, and then they leave. And they do that 6 days in a row until the seventh day. They march around it 7 times and shout, and all the walls come falling down. And so we talked a lot about how the means can seem really, really strange to the followers of God. After all, that's very strange. We're going to see how that is strange again today. And we're going to ask, what do these means really reveal about God and what he calls his people to? What do these means mean for us today? You know, like, what do they actually tell us? So without further ado, let's just jump right in. We're going to just read the passage again this week. And just remember that back in chapter 2, when it comes to considering these events from the inside of Jericho, back in chapter 2, Rahab let us know, all of us are terrified. Everyone in the land is terrified of you guys, she tells the spies that she eventually lets out of her window. All of us are terrified of you, okay? And as I read it, we're just going to read the first 5 verses here. See if you can identify the main tension that is in this narrative. Because this is narrative, and the Bible is narrative, and so narrative introduces tensions, okay? And so considering all that we've read before, see if you might be able to identify that tension that is pitched right here in these opening verses. Okay, verse 1. Now Jericho was strongly fortified because of the Israelites, no one leaving or entering. Now in other translations it says that now Jericho was shut in or shut up, both from the inside and the outside. No one was entering or leaving it. And so there's a Hebrew wordplay that's going on here, which is really meant to say that physically Jericho was shut up from the outside, and then on the inside, people are also shut up to this idea of the God of the Israelites taking over. Not only Jericho, but the entire Promised Land. So you kind of have this play going on. The city shut up just like the people's hearts. Okay, no one leaving or entering. And the Lord said to Joshua, look, I have handed Jericho, its king, and its best soldiers over to you. Now, Jericho is really interesting. Obviously, you can march around it in the course of a single day. Like, you can go to Jericho, and the Israelites have done this. They've marched around it, then they go back. And more than that, you can march around it 7 times in one day, which means that this city might not be all that large. And it was actually hotly debated, like, wait a sec, how big is Jericho? It's called a city. It says it has a king, but how big, in fact, actually is it? And then there was actually an archaeological find of Jericho in the late 1800s, and by the early 1900s, they determined that it's about 7 acres in area. So an acre is about the size of an American football field, for reference there. You can't really use soccer pitches because they're all different sizes. Like, what's that sport about? They're all different sizes. Anybody not know this? I just learned this recently. I was like, what? They're not all playing on the same fields? You know, just depending on how lazy that club is, they'll make it smaller, large, I guess. But anyways, so it's 7 football fields about, okay, in size. And so there likely was only probably a couple thousand people that would have been in, you could have fit in the city of Jericho. And maybe at this size, it's not even that appropriate to call it a city, okay? And we have a king mentioned here. But the word king in Hebrew comes from the word, it is the word melech. And melech really can denote any leader or ruler. It really comes to me at its core, the sovereign of an area. So this is the sovereign of this 7-acre fortress that has walls around it. So the king is the sovereign of this 7-acre fortress, and we're told that it has its best troops in here. So likely, after all this archaeological finds and all the academics got done with it, they're like, Jericho's a small fortress, likely a military garrison that is positioned in a strategic part in the plain so that when an invading army would come in, they'd be able to hole up and perhaps even fight back. Or if like a smaller army came in, they'd have 1,000 troops at the ready to go and just take care of it from this strategic place. So that's really probably most likely what Jericho was. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't other industries that would attach to something like this. So this is probably exactly why Rahab lives in Jericho, because she's a prostitute. And so kind of that profession would have been kind of hand in hand with kind of soldiers stationed in a fortress all alone, okay? So this is likely why even we see that Rahab is there. This is likely a military fortress, and this king mentioned is maybe like a commander or a general or something like this. All right, so let's keep reading. And the instruction here is march around the city with all the men of war, all the men of war. And so back a few chapters, what we find is when Israel crosses over the Jordan, there's 2.5 tribes that are left on the east side, but they send their fighting men over. And that number, we're told, is 40,000 of them. So 40,000 fighting men kind of come from 2.5 of the tribes. Do the math, we're like at 150 to 200,000 fighting men, perhaps, give or take. It's pretty loose. They don't really count them here. But so you have 150 to 200,000 fighting men going to Jericho. And what do they do when they get there? Circling the city one time. Or you could say it like this, the Hebrew verb is encircling the city. So kind of like where the city has people completely all the way, or encircle it one time. Encircle it one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns trumpets in front of the ark. Now as we read this today, there's a lot of horns. There's ram's horns, there's trumpets, there's just 20 mentions of these horns. Like as you read the scripture, this passage, you might even be tempted to think like, is this all about horns? Like what's going on? Okay, but it's not, I promise you. But there's just a lot of them. There's just a lot of horn talk in here. Okay, but on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times while the priests blow the trumpets. When there is a long, prolonged blast of the horn and you hear its sound, have all the troops give a mighty shout. Then the city will collapse, and the troops will advance encircled in it, each man straight ahead. Okay, so 360 degrees straight ahead. So, what's the tension here? Anybody pick up on the tension? What about Rahab? We're told that there's this woman who lives in here that has helped the spies escape out of her house, which is in the wall, and they came out of the window. If the strategy is to completely encircle this thing 360 degrees, and then all the walls are going to fall down in such a way that each person can just go straight in, is she going to be spared? Actually, up to this point, we're not sure that this promise that the spies made to her has been ratified by anyone. Joshua hasn't said, great, that's our plan. We'll do it. We'll save her. God hasn't said, oh yeah, Rahab helped my spies escape. I'm going to work on saving her. See, this is what happens when you begin to engage the scriptures and read the scriptures as narrative. All of a sudden, these tensions emerge. When you read the scripture as if you don't know the end of the story, you're like, wait a sec. Is Rahab going to make it? Were they even allowed to give her that promise? And them giving her that promise, is this actually just the Israelites beginning to be unfaithful, like in allowing the inhabitants to remain in the land like God has asked them not to? This is really the tension that we want to be feeling right now after we read these first 5 verses. Wait, is Rahab going to make it? That's what great narrative does. Kind of plants questions in your minds. It makes you feel anxieties for the characters, right? Like, this isn't Joshua just forgetting, like, he's kind of writing a fictitious account, and he's like, oh shoot, my details got mixed up. All the walls fell down, and Rahab's lived in the wall. This is like a tension that's intentionally created for us to feel and worry about as we continue reading. Now, why would God have them be encircling this city 6 days in a row? Why would he do that? Because our knee-jerk reaction that it's pretty strange is right on the money. It's right on the money. One of my favorite quotes from scholars this week, it goes like this. He said, the instruction for the ceremonial procession and the description of its execution are undeniably confusing. So I can't figure this out. He gets paid to figure this stuff out. He's like, this is undeniably confusing. There's like an overlap between the fact that this is like some religious ceremony with all these horns, and these ram's horns are not even that militaristic. These are the type of horns that weren't really made for music making, just noise making. This is like a weird religious thing that's coupled with this strange military encounter. It's undeniably confusing. Now, there's people in kind of the academic realm that their sole job is to find out how what we see in the Israelites and God leading them into the promised land and throughout their entire history really overlaps with how other kingdoms conceived of themselves. So things like they'll bring up to the point of how it's very common for kingdoms of this time to etch laws into stone. Okay, that's everywhere. I was actually at the Louvre in France almost a month ago now, and you can go to the Code of Hammurabi, for instance, is one of these. But even if you go to kind of Chalcedon, where Abraham was from, during the time of Abraham, there's all these stones with laws inscribed in them all over the place. It's this is kind of what kingdoms did back then, And so in a lot of ways, God is doing similar things that the kingdoms around the Israelites would have done in order to kind of show them the true and the most true way and the most beautiful way that it could be done. This is kind of a way that God works. So there's just tons of these throughout the Old Testament scriptures, but here it's very strange because another scholar pointed at it, and said, not even Richard Hess, who's one of the leading Joshua scholars, can find a pre-battle ritual like this one. A pre-battle ritual in the ancient Near East comparable to this one. This is the guy who finds all this stuff. He can't even find anything. This is weird. This is really, really strange. So why? Why the fuss of God asking the Israelite to employ all these means? Well, we answered that a bit last week from the standpoint of the Israelites, and today I want to suggest that there's a key reason for this from the standpoint of those who are inside the walls as well. So try to put yourself in the shoes of someone residing in Jericho as we read these next few verses here. We'll take 8 through 14 here. So Joshua summoned the priests. So 1 through 5 is essentially receiving the instructions. This is how you're going to take the city. Now Joshua is going to turn this over to the people. So Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 trumpets in front of the ark of the Lord. He said to the troops, move forward, march around the city, and have the armed men go ahead of the ark of the Lord. After Joshua had spoken to the troops, 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets before the Lord moved forward and blew the trumpets. The ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. While the trumpets were blowing, the armed men in front of the priests who blew the trumpet, I told you there's a lot of trumpets in here, and the rear guard went behind the ark. But Joshua had commanded the troops, do not shout or let your voice be heard. Don't let one word come out of your mouth until the time I say shout. So common in the ancient Near East would have been the strategy that the troops who had surrounded a village or a town or a fortress in siege warfare would have kind of like issued a lot of like intimidating either threats or even just like making fun of them. Joshua says, no, we're not going to do that. This is different. Okay, that's not how we fight, essentially. Then you are to shout. So the ark of the Lord was carried around the city, and encircling it once, they returned to the camp and spent the night there. And the camp is Gilgal, where they were encamped before they came up. It's about 8 miles away. Okay, so this is a long day for the fighting men. They're walking 8 miles, which I Googled it. It takes you about 2.5, 3 hours, okay? 2.5, 3 hours to walk 8 miles, unless you're George Darkwa. I don't know if George is here today. He can do that much quicker. Okay? Then you're encircling the city, and then you're walking back another 8 miles. So you have a full workday for these fighting men still for this time. All right, so pause. You are either a soldier in Jericho. Maybe you're one of the people who from the surrounding villages or farms have fled to the fortress of Jericho for defense. The preparations have been made in Jericho. The grain and water would have been brought into the city to outlast a siege warfare of sorts. And really the hope is that the larger kingdom that Jericho is a part of might band together with other kingdoms in the area, and a force would be brought together, and that would challenge the Israelites. That's the main hope for the people in Jericho at this time. This happens in ancient Near East warfare. We actually have it happening to the Israelites and to Israel several times in the scriptures. We see 5 kings banded together and tried to challenge them. So that's really the hope that those residing inside of Jericho would have had. And then one day, the Israelites come. They hear the horns, and they're like, shoot, the army hasn't been pulled together to challenge these guys yet. Oh no. And then all of a sudden, they show up and they're completely encircled. They're looking out. There's only a couple thousand of them on the inside. And looking out at 200,000 fighting soldiers. The anxiety would skyrocket. I mean, you just kind of picture like all these scenes in siege warfare movies that you've seen, like maybe like Lord of the Rings or things like this, of just people crying out in the streets, wailing. Is this the end of us? Vomiting? I don't know. Just the anxiety is just completely ramped up. And then it's released. Israel leaves. Whew. But now the anxiety is kind of replaced with confusion. What's happening? Is this a trap? We've never heard of something like this before. We've never seen this. Just imagine just like now fear is mixed with complete confusion. What's going on? Left with maybe the thought of, if I do nothing, certainly I can't make it through. Certainly, we're not going to make it through. So if I stay here, I'm going to go down with the ship, only to see it happen the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And we don't know for sure, but it's likely that this kind of intimidation and anxiety, but then release of that would have made many people think, let's get out of here. My window is now. Let's hop out the window, just like Rahab. We knew that people could hop out the windows. The spies did it a couple chapters before. So I'm not saying this happened, but it's likely that you have kind of people who are like, nope, there's no hope for us here, hopping out the window and running into the hill country, just like the spies did. Where people are given a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth chance to kind of flee. Perhaps that's a piece of what's going on here. Perhaps this is a little display of God's mercy for those in Jericho. You can still run. But let's keep reading here, because there is a certain group of people that we don't really have to make a lot of presumptions about, because we have much more certainty about what's going on with them. They enter the scene here soon. Verse 15, early on the seventh day, they started at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same way. That was the only day they marched around the city 7 times. After the 7th time, the priests blew the trumpets, and Joshua said to the troops, "Shout, for the Lord has given you this city. But the city and everything in it are set apart to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and everyone with her in the house will live, because she hid the messengers we sent. But keep yourselves from the things set apart, or you will be set apart for destruction. If you take any of those things, you will set apart the camp of Israel for destruction and make trouble for it. For all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are dedicated to the Lord and must go into the Lord's treasury." So pause again. Those on the inside are in a new state of terror as we go for day 7. All of a sudden, I hear those ram's horns come around one time, and then I hear it come a second time, and then a third. This is different. And then a fourth, and then a fifth, and then a sixth, and then the 7th, and then it stops. But the Israelites aren't going anywhere. They're still here. They're not going back to their camp 8 miles away. And instead what we see is Joshua stops everything and he gives instruction on what's going to happen. And one of those instructions has to do with Rahab. Hey, we are going, only Rahab the prostitute and everyone with her in the house will live because she hid the messengers we sent. That's what's going on here. And what we're going to see in the rest of the account is Rahab gets not just one mention, but 2 mentions. Not just 2 mentions, but 3 mentions. It's going to happen before the raid happens. In the middle, we're going to see as it happens that Rahab is taken care of. And then at the end, in reflecting, hey, we took care of Rahab and we saved her and her family. Clearly, this is a very, very crucial part of this account, solving our tension at the very beginning. What about Rahab? What about Rahab? And to really talk about Jericho without Rahab is to miss the primary thrust of this passage. So let's ask the question, what do you think her week was like? What a week. She's undergoing the same events that everyone else in the city has undergone. The Israelites have showed up each day. They've surrounded the fortress. They've left day after day after day, and it must have been such a painful wait for her for a different set of reasons, right? For very different set of reasons. That's not to say that she didn't experience some of the same emotions that her fellow Jericho people experienced. Like she could have been tempted to run just like anybody else. And we knew that she could because she let the spies out of her window. She had opportunity to go and get out of there. I don't know if they're going to keep their promise anymore. I don't know if they're going to do it. After all, what are these guys doing? They're just going around and leaving. Is this the people I want to join up with? They're kind of idiots, right? Are these the people I want to join up with? She could have doubted that the Israelites would even uphold their promise. I don't know. But she didn't run. She chose to trust and wait. To wait and trust. And perhaps when the Israelites showed up each and every day, it inspired something very different within her heart compared to the other people, where they saw impending death and doom and destruction. Rahab sees the same people encircling the city and sees hope. She says, I have deliverance through this. Maybe some days, she said, today's the day. Today's the day where I get to go and I get delivered from this way of life, from this people, to a new way of life and a new people and a new God. Today's the day that I'm going to find freedom. This is such an important note. You see it happening throughout in each and every era of the people of God. People who consider this God and consider joining this people. There's people who see it with hope and people who see it with dread. It's the same God. It's the same. But people who consider that as dreadful, doom, destruction, people who see that as hope, life, opportunity. Every era of God's people, it's been like that. You read through this Bible, that is a unifying experience of humanity as they consider God. Doom, hope. Rahab's on the side of hope. But in that hope, Rahab could have also taken her deliverance and salvation into her own hands, right? She could have run out that window and when they came in and circled and run towards those soldiers. Hey, it's me, it's Rahab, here's my family. I was made a promise. I'm good here, right? I'm good here, right? She most certainly would have been killed. Why? Well, we don't see that Joshua tells the troops what's going on until the seventh day. Isn't that interesting? And so Rahab is likely just sitting in her home with this hope that's forcing her to cry out, God, just do it already. God, just do it already. I'm waiting here. You guys are taking forever. Another day and you've left? Just do it already. Just do it already. Now, remember the tension. Is Rahab going to experience this deliverance that these guys promised? Did these spies even have the authority to issue such promise? Verse 20, let's see what's going to happen next. So the troops shouted, and the trumpets sounded. When they heard the blast of the trumpet, the troops gave a great shout, and the wall collapsed. The troops advanced into the city, each man straight ahead, and they captured the city. They completely destroyed everything in the city with the sword, every man and woman, both young and old, and every ox, sheep, and donkey. Oh no. But it goes on. Joshua said to the two men who had scouted the land, go to the prostitute's house. Apparently it wasn't destroyed. And bring the woman out of there and all who are with her just as you swore her. These are the two spies. Go in there and get her just as you swore to her. So the young men who had scouted went in and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. Deliverance. Now, did the means change? No. Look what it says. The troops advanced into the city. This is back up in verse 20. Each man straight ahead. So the walls came down, but not hers. Not Rahab's house. Rahab's house is spared. What happens here? This is what we see, God confirming the promise that was made to her. Her house was still there. Somehow all the walls came down. After encircling the city, each man, they go forward just like the plan was. But Rahab's house doesn't fall down. She's not, along with her family, ejected into the city to suffer the same destruction that they're experiencing. Rahab is delivered. And it's actually a little bit of a callback. It's a little bit of a callback. We've seen this happen with the people of God before, and at least two clear points in the scriptures. The first is when God told Abraham that he was going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham says, God, surely if there's 50 righteous people in Sodom, you won't destroy it. And God says, surely not, I will not. And then it goes back and forth, Abraham lowering the number each and every time. And you don't, until it gets all the way down to 10, you don't realize why Abraham's doing this until the next chapter. And it says, and Lot was living in Sodom, which is Abraham's nephew, along with Lot's family, his wife, his daughters. It's like, now it makes so much sense why Abraham's worried about Sodom. But before God destroys Sodom, he sends an angel into Sodom and pulls out Lot and his wife and his daughters, and they flee the city before the destruction comes in. And the Israelites as a whole had experienced a version of this too in their story. They've experienced it already. Any guesses? Any guesses? The plagues in Egypt. And it's really fascinating in the plagues in Egypt because the plagues come to Egypt and the Israelites are living in the land, much like Rahab is living in Jericho. And none of the plagues come to the Israelites. And it says in 5 distinct different spots that the verbiage is really, really key here because the same thing is taking place. So this is in the plague of the swarm of flies in Exodus 8, starting in verse 22. You can look it up later. But Exodus 8:22, this is the Lord speaking. He says, "But on that day I will give, when the swarms of the flies come, on that day I will give a special treatment to the land of Goshen where my people are living. No flies will be there, that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people." And then in the death of livestock, the same thing. "But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing of all that the Israelites own will die." You see the same thing happening in the seventh plague of hail, where it's explicitly mentioned. "So Moses stretched out his staff towards heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail. Lightning struck the land, and the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. The hail with lightning flashing through it was so severe that nothing like it had occurred in the land of Egypt since it had become a nation. Throughout the land of Egypt, the hail struck down everything in the field, both people and animals. The hail beat down every plant of the field and shattered every tree in the field. The only place it didn't hail was in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were." And then the ninth plague of darkness is just one sentence. All of Egypt is dark. And it says, "For 3 days it was so dark in Egypt that the Egyptians didn't even leave their houses because no one could see." And it says, "Yet all the Israelites had light where they lived." And then, of course, in the plague of the firstborn, "that you may know that there's a distinction between Egypt and Israel." So God is making a distinction in Jericho based off of the promises that his people have made to Rahab and her family. And she's spared. We're going to see this happen again in Israel, actually, in Joshua, actually, as they go into the land. God is confirming this promise. He's saying, Rahab the prostitute, she's mine. I don't care that she's a prostitute. She wants to be a part of this family. And so I will make a distinction between her and the rest of those living in Jericho with shut-up hearts. I'll make a distinction because she's part of my family now. She's mine. And her house in the wall stands while all the other walls and houses around her fall over. It's a point of precision of God saying, nope, not Rahab, she's mine. I'll make a distinction between Rahab and the rest of those who dwell in Jericho. She was up against the impossible, really, though. I want to look at just everything that Rahab was up against here. This is an impossible thing to hope for, that the judgment of God would pass over her. But it included a strategy that every wall would be crumbled, including her house. But she's heard about the plagues of Egypt. She told the spies she had. She knows that this God is a God that makes distinction between other people and his people. People with open hearts to him and people with closed hearts to him. And all she has to do for deliverance is just trust and wait. That's all she has to do. This is one of the primary ways that the God of these scriptures is different than any other religious system in the entire world. Like all of the other religions of this world, it's what do you have to do in order to gain the favor of the divinity that they might act on your behalf? You pray 5 times a day. Oof, I would fail that. You need to follow the 8-fold path to enlightenment. That's how you're going to tap into real, true spiritual enlightenment. Oof, I'd fail that. If you want to experience some spiritual breakthrough, you better do X, Y, or Z, and you need to do them in precisely the right way in order that that might be extended to you. That's mysticism. Not this God. This God says, trust and wait, I will act. You show up and believe, I will act. You show up, watch what I'll do. That's what this God does. That's the formula with this God. Now, several people have twisted even this God and his word to say that you need to purify yourself in order for him to act for you. Look at Rahab. Has she purified herself? Nothing more than opening up her heart. That's it. That's it. Consider Rahab. What purity did she have? None. She didn't do anything but open up her heart to the Lord. And she trusted and waited, even though deliverance may have seemed impossible. And in doing this, actually, this is what's fascinating. She's like Christ. So, let's consider, Jesus in the tomb after the cross. Did the second persona of God die on the cross? Well, in a sense, his flesh was put to death, but it's not like God died on the cross. You can't kill God. but consider Jesus' 3 days in the tomb and the similarity of Rahab's 6 days in Jericho. Father, would you just do it already? Father, would you just do it already? He could have taken things into his own hands. His apostle John makes it very clear to us. In him was life, okay? In him was life. That life was the light of man. And he tells us, through him all things were created. Okay, so in the second persona of the Trinity, you have this powerful, creating, life-giving force. It's probable that Jesus could have raised himself up from the dead, but what are we told happens? He trusts and he waits for the Father to do it. The Apostle Paul tells us in Romans chapter 6, actually, that Christ was raised by the glory of the Father. So we see Christ waiting and trusting and waiting for deliverance from death to life. Consider the early church. This is the same formula with the early church. Right after Jesus is raised from the dead and he's walking around with his disciples for 40 days, and he says, all right, I'm going to go. You guys are going to be responsible with making people or inviting people to trust me. Okay, that's your job. Not just with the people you know, but with all the nations of the earth. Okay, that's what you're going to do. And then he's like, okay, I'm leaving. And they're like, what? How are we supposed to do that, Jesus? And he says, you will wait for me, and I will send you power from on high. And so they go to Jerusalem, and they go to an upper room, and they pray, and they wait. They trust, and they wait. And if you do the math, it's about a week later that God pours out his Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, on them, and God acts through them powerfully. Peter preaches a sermon, and they go from a ragtag group of guys who can fit in one small upper, and ladies, it says that Jesus' female disciples are there with them as well, who can fit in one upper room to 3,000 in a single day. That. Trust and wait. Show up and see what I will do. I'm sure they were up there being like, Father, do it already. Would you do it already? You see, the Jesus movement isn't about his followers being clever, wise, or strong. It's about them showing up and trusting and waiting for the wisdom and the strength of God to flow through them. In fact, it's even better when we are meek. It's even better when we're weak, because then God shames the strong and the wise when he uses weak and stupid people to do incredible things, quite frankly. You guys are intelligent, don't worry. But this is the beauty of the gospel, and a God who shows up and acts through people who have open hearts, who are just trusting and waiting for him. This is Rahab. She's a prostitute. She's considered nothing, just a tool for male pleasure. But God acts powerfully to deliver her. Wow. God has chosen the weak things of this world to shame the strong. He chose a prostitute to shame soldiers. He's using the foolish things of this world to shame the wise, likely not educated, definitely not in warfare. Makes it through the siege of Jericho. God's chosen the lowly things of this world, the despised things, to shame and help people count for nothing the things that we view as high and reputable. That's Paul in the New Testament. That's the gospel here for Rahab. God powerfully acting to deliver her because she trusted and waited. Why? So that no one may boast before him. We've been here in this building for a little over 9 months now. But for the 2 years before that, we were faced with being kicked to the curb at our previous location, actually. The owners had decided to sell the building. They wanted to turn them into townhomes, and that since has happened. But it was this really long, prolonged eviction, actually. It wasn't like, it's this season in my mind marked with PTSD. Peter, I need to talk to Peter maybe about that. Anxiety was high for a long time. It almost felt like each week we were encircled, not by the Lord's army. Like each week we were being encircled. Doom was imminent. It was a really difficult time. Anxiety just is skyrocketing. Dave, I don't think you checked your email for a couple months just because I don't know what's going to show up in my email inbox. You're great at answering email now. You're like, way better than me even. I'm like, dang, I should get better. You're really good at it now. Okay, but for me, I wanted to jump out the window. I wanted to just get out of there. Part of that process mean that we didn't really know like when not the Lord's army would invade and we'd have to get out. We didn't really have what one might call a lease to be there. So I was like, we just got to get out of here. And so we had contingency plans, so many contingency plans that we had made, and as kind of just in case. And I was like, we got to stop waiting for these people to invade. We just got to get out of here. We got to go. We got to actualize one of these. One of them included a houseboat. That would have been great. That would have been really great. I wanted to climb out that window just to make all this chronic anxiety just go away. But it would have been chasing deliverance, not God. So 2 years we trusted, we waited. We trusted that God had a plan for us as a humble congregation, that we just wanted a place to proclaim his wonders and praise him for them. God, just do it already. Just deliver us. Just do it all. Little did we know that there was another humble congregation waiting, trusting the Lord, to have him deliver them into their next chapter as a church as well. Now, no one looking in from the outside on these two congregations would think that we were anything special. But in our trusting and waiting on God to act, he acted powerfully. And we worked so hard for 2 years to try to find a new location or make it work, the one that we were at. But in the midst of just one single meeting, God just made it work like that, and it wasn't our own doing. It was his. We can't boast in the cleverness of the pastors to take the next step forward. We can't boast in the strength of a congregation that banded together and significantly financially sacrificed to make another location or another option work, because all of the other options included that. Like we had a pretty sweetheart deal over there. No, we can only just point to God and say, look at what our God has done through foolish and weak people. We trusted, we waited, and he acted. Now, I don't know where you're seeking God's deliverance in your life. I have no idea. I'm not sure what's been going through your mind as we've been talking about, God, just do it already. Would you show up in my life? I've been waiting for you. I'm not sure what parts of your life that is, whether it's in your singleness and your career and your friendships, your relationships, and your marriage and your parenting. There's 20 different ways. I'm not sure. Those are good things, and trusting and waiting on the Lord to deliver you in them is so worth it. It's so hard in the midst of it, let me tell you. But don't jump out the window is what I'm saying. Don't jump out the window and actualize deliverance for yourself. Trust in his. Don't settle for anything less than his plans, his purposes in your life. And now in order to trust and wait for God, you're going to need people who understand what trusting and waiting feels like. And so you need to actually be talking to people about those things in your life that are bumping around in your head, in your heart. So, cohorts is one place to do this, but you need to find someone to talk to that about. And so I guess people have been asking, hey, can you guys give us some more things to do, direct things to do after these sermons? That's one of them. Find someone to talk about that experience. What is it in your life that you're like, God, just do it already? How does that feel? How do you want to jump out the window? What makes it really hard to trust and wait? We need to talk about those things with one another. We need to. We need to. How do you feel like you're Rahab in the room? Just waiting. Seeing God's deliverance come close maybe even, but then just turn around and walk away. But we also need to keep in mind that there are things in our lives that we're never going to see God's deliverance in. That we're going to see perhaps even come close, but then it's going to turn around and just walk away. Perhaps the pastor isn't supposed to say such things, but these are things like ailing bodies, sin that continues to entangle in our lives. No matter how hard we try or who we talk to about it, it just seems to always present itself again and again and again. These are the things that can really only come afresh when Jesus comes again. Things like new bodies and that don't hurt, new hearts that don't sin, new minds that don't worry about everything, right? Like you see, in really significant ways, we're in Rahab's house for the rest of our lives, in a certain sense, trusting and waiting on the Lord to deliver one day. Seeing him get close maybe in times, but then, oh shoot, they just walked 8 miles back to Gilgal. So this is Rahab's story is a call to trust and wait in those certain things for seasons, but then throughout our entire lives for those things that God promises to deliver us from, but we don't actually fully see and recognize and won't see actualized fully until Jesus comes again. Now, Rahab's story is great for this dynamic of deliverance, yes. It's also great for one more reason that I'll talk about today. Because even though she was trusting and waiting on God, she wasn't inactive. She wasn't. She wasn't sitting around and doing nothing, in a sense. What has she done? She's invited other people to trust and wait with her. Like those 2 years as a church were really, really hard, but we resolved not to stop or change doing anything that we were doing as a church. And when it came to like trusting or inviting other people to trust and wait with us. Like that is exactly what the call of God's people is to do, and we see Rahab doing it. Have you considered the perspective of her family members? What did that look like for them? They're stuck in a room, presumably together for 6 days, no streaming services. 6 days. What did those conversations look like? How did she persuade them to come into her home and hope similarly like she was hoping in this God of the Israelites? Rahab the prostitute in Jericho is turned into Rahab the evangelist. She is encountering her family, inviting them to trust in the Lord as well. It's completely fascinating. Rahab, the sharer of good news. There's a way through this coming destruction. His name's Yahweh. He's going to spare us. There's a way. The faith of Rahab. She doesn't even know the Hebrew Torah, but she is embodying God's call to Abraham. I will bless you, God says to Abraham, and you will be a blessing to all the nations. She's embodying it. She's never read that verse. She's embodying it. This is what faith does. She gets from the get-go that grasping the deliverance of God means inviting other people to participate as well. And so she persuades her family members into cramming as many people into that room, I think, as she could so that they could experience that deliverance as well. She's one of the clearest pictures in the Old Testament of really what it means to faithfully act as the head of the household. The prostitute of the household is now the head of the household. The prostitute of the household is now an evangelist for Yahweh, bringing good news to them. It's absolutely incredible. Rahab's such a special person. That's why we did 3 sermons on her. Now she's getting a 4th. Maybe we'll come back and give a 5th. I don't know. She's so special. She's so special. This is all to say that, friends, you're not the only one whose deliverance is depending upon your trusting and waiting on the Lord. It's those who are connected to you as well. Your friends, your coworkers, your brothers, your sisters, your brothers and sisters in Christ even. They might get the courage to continue to trust and hope in God because of your trust and hope in God. Your spouse, your children. Your trust and waiting and hope in the Lord can serve as a linchpin that keeps like two halves of a hinge together of people being willing to consider God and trusting and hoping in Him themselves. Like you're the linchpin that's kind of holding that together, and if your trust and hope and waiting goes away, then it just falls apart. The door falls off. There's no connection there. We see this in the New Testament times. Paul says this really crazy thing to men and women in the in the early church. He says, your spouse, you believing person, your unbelieving spouse is sanctified by your belief in Christ. What? Like they're drawn near to God. He's saying, you're the linchpin. You're keeping them close to the even possibility of considering who God is, considering Jesus, that they might have the opportunity to see actually what it looks like to trust and wait on the Lord. You're the linchpin. You are. Now, they're settled outside of the camp of Israel, is what we're told there at the end of verse 23. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. And without a doubt, for a time there, they are given the opportunity to learn about who this God is, to see what it's actually going to cost them to follow this God, what their lives could look like, what their lives must look like in some regards. And they had the opportunity to be among the people. That's actually what it says here. And at the end of verse 25, we'll just read verse 25. However, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho. And she still lives in, or you could read among Israel today. And we know that she becomes great-great-grandfather to the greatest king of Israel, King David. Grandmother to the king of Israel, David, in this day. She does, and her family has the opportunity to live among Israel at this point in time. They had the opportunity because Rahab trusted and waited on the Lord, so they had the opportunity. So the question I want to leave you guys with is, who can you function and are you functioning as a linchpin for in this life? And I think every person should have 5 people. Should have 5 people. Think of it. Who are the 5 people that God is calling me to be a linchpin? My trusting and waiting in the Lord isn't just for my own deliverance, but these 5 other people might have the opportunity to make that decision because of my trusting and waiting on the Lord. And you should pray for them each and every day. 5 people. Maybe you have more. Praise the Lord. But 5. You should at least have 5. Pray for them daily. We're never trusting and waiting on God's deliverance just for ourselves. From the beginning of when God starts calling his people, all the way back to Abraham, to the very end, it's our trusting and waiting is a means for God to act on our behalf and others' behalf. And so if you want people to have the opportunity to decide, continue to pray for them. Continue to ask God in those times that you're meeting with them, is now the time where I let them know what it looks like to trust Jesus? No, you don't need to say, this is what it looks like for you. But you start with, this is what it looked like for me. What'd you do this weekend? Went to church. It's trust and waiting on the Lord. Now they know. This is a linchpin. If I want to trust and wait on the Lord, I can talk to this person. It could be that simple. Let's pray.